And joining us in studio, Adil Nchabeleng is president of Transform RSA. Tsepo Khadima is a political analyst. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. Let's just unpack the wish list there from the DA one by one. And we'll start, of course, with tackling the issue of investor confidence and confidence in South Africans alike. So I assume that would be consumer confidence, that would be, that the jobs are created, etc.
Look, I think one of the most puzzling things, and I think as South Africans, we now need to start demanding for when people make statements such as that we need to inspire investor confidence to define in the greatest detail what this investor looks like. Because they have never been able to define, because there is no investor. I am telling you now, Cindy, there is no investor at all. What we have a lot of funds, both in South Africa and offshore funds, that are happy to buy government bonds, and the money, the proceeds that to date have been raised on the bond market by this government have never warranted come into the state, into this economy. Because all the money that is being raised from the so-called investors is going towards repaying or servicing our interest costs on the gargantuan 2.2 trillion rand debt. And it really baffles me that we can have people talking about investor confidence. Investor, it must be people or companies or funds that invest in the productive sectors of the economy. Simply put, in economic infrastructure, where economic activity can happen, or in productive sectors. It could be in farming, it could be in factories, because that is long-term investment. The investors that the Democratic Alliance would like us to believe that we must kowtow to and appease at all cost is that one that can be able to sell at a moment's notice and move their money out of the country, and therefore bringing untold harm on this economy. What we are sitting with now, I had hoped that there would have been agitating or advocating at least that we have to do something drastically urgent about the 2.2 trillion rand debt. And that something drastic is not the sale of state-owned enterprises. Because this year alone, the whole is 200 billion rand. Next year, it will be another 230 to 250 billion rand in interest costs. Therefore, we'll end up with a whole that is 400 billion. Even if you sell state-owned enterprises, it is not the solution. And what do you do the following year? And what South Africans need is not hope. South Africans need simply factories, farms, bridges, ports, things like that, where people can be employed. And lastly, urgently, the redesign of our tax code, because right now companies pay no more than 20% of the total 1.1 trillion rand collected by SARS. It means, therefore, that is skewed. The consumer, people at home, even those that are on social grants, at the end of the day, VAT, which is the leading income generator for this country, and then, of course, personal income tax, is ordinary people. So companies are shielded, and what they have made, the big companies have got a strong lobby at Treasury to ensure that Treasury never ever changes the tax code of this country so that they can pay their fair share. They can sit with 1.4 trillion rand and not even bet an eyelid.
We'll come to all of those. I think let's just unpack them, Tsepo. I think you've said quite a mouthful, but I'll summarize it as such, in the sense that if you've seen the video or the book around economic hitmen, on how these things are structured, where multinationals, or rather industrialized nations, will purport to be investing, but essentially they're investing in their own companies, and the money is again extracted, illicit flow thereof, into the economy. So in reality, we're essentially chasing our own tail.
You know, the interesting part, actually, Cindy, what Tsepo just highlighted right now is, one, we have a lot of cash which is in foreign donor aid that comes into an economy. But remember, that money does not come into the South African economy. It goes directly to the companies that the country releases aid on behalf. And they come in here, purporting themselves as consultants as well as NGOs, coming in to help the South African people. So we don't really receive that much of investors' input in terms of bringing in capital. Because if we had this investor so-called drive, improving our economy, today we would have one of the most performing economy. We would have power stations being built, we would have these bridges being built, we would have roads, houses, and everything. South Africa will be a booming economy. So the aspect that actually DA currently tries to give us an indication of a shadow in terms of what is possible is quite a lie. Let's be fair. Given the task that DA has, they've been in government for over a year right now in the metros, in Johannesburg, in Pretoria, as well as in Cape Town. What have they done for those key three economies in the country to improve them, to bolster economic drive, to bolster investment in terms of their own destinations? They have done nothing. So this kind of wish list that they always come up with, pretending and purporting as if they are a ruling party in leadership, and given the slate as if they would make a difference, is actually quite misleading. They know the facts about the global economic slump. They have not done anything to actually even start addressing the basics. The cities are the hubs for economic growth.
Okay,
why are
but
the cities not performing?
Because the mold has been set in what we adopted as a country, including part of its policies, and especially when it comes to macroeconomic policy and the financial framework that is lauded, supposedly, you know, to be of international standards. But we know that it hasn't benefited the major majority or the black majority in that. So when you say tackle the slow economic growth, this has been the case in perpetuity. I mean, you know, since when last did we reach 4% growth? We don't even aspire for that. You know, at the moment we're at point.
During Trevor Manuel's time, we had 4% growth. It was jobless growth. When you are measuring GDP, it is not a full measure of the health of the economy of a nation. So GDP, I'll say, it's like a dashboard on your car. You might have the speed that you're traveling at, but you got to look at your fuel. You got to look at the heat that your radiator is able to handle, and you have to look at your rev count if it's running well. So the GDP is more like the speed that you're running at, but you might be running out of fuel, which is what is happening in South Africa right now. We have got less people, more and more people are joining the unemployment rolls. The population is growing. And if anything, by the year 2040, we'll have a 16 million strong army of unemployed youth. So the trajectory, unless it is arrested, it doesn't look good at all. So on Wednesday, what am I hoping for personally? I'm hoping that Minister Malusi Gigaba will once and for all, with him being the minister responsible for South African Airways, give a kickstart to Project Solaris. Because in Project Solaris, the creation of biojet fuel from this tobacco plant called Solaris can create over 400,000 jobs in this country, more than what the mining sector currently is. And the buck stops with him. We hope and pray that he will include that in his mini budget statement on Wednesday. And more importantly, to also change the tax code so that corporates are no longer reliant on them paying income tax, because income, in terms of companies, is an opinion, it is not fact. Other jurisdictions, economies, be it Hong Kong, be it Germany, they have change their tax code to ensure that they can be able to tax activity. Our neighbor, Botswana, for example, is not reliant on income tax, because if they were reliant on 100% income tax, which is based on opinion, they would not have been able to maintain the level of growth that they've been able to maintain. So these are the things that we really need. We need pragmatism, but also we have to do something with our debt. This year, we don't have the 200 billion rand to service our debt. And very soon, before the end of the year, we'll find ourselves being run by the International Monetary Fund. Is that what South Africa, our sovereignty will be gone overnight. So that 2.2 trillion rand, and very interestingly, the largest pension fund of China came out with an announcement yesterday, this very yesterday, that of their 317 billion US dollars under management, they are now going to be seeking investment overseas. Why is it that we are not at the door of that fund, pension fund, so that we can get investment into our productive sectors? And as I mentioned, Project Solaris is just one such investment that can be made, which can bring long-term benefits for this economy. But what the Democratic Alliance is saying, everything else that they have said, I would be happy to debate with them, is going to bring us nothing but pain and hardship.
Okay, let's invite Oliver Dixon. social political analyst. Welcome and thanks so much for joining us. And just looking at the dependency that we have on the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the fact that there is more seemingly aid than what there is trade, and we're shedding off more of our wealth and resources than what we're getting in return. Malusi Gigaba, on his inauguration, very quickly was there to say, look, the policy will stagnate, nothing will change pretty much. I don't know what we're expecting on Wednesday. If he's going to make any radical announcements on either tax for companies or even different industries when it comes to a few reserves.
Just before the Pravin Gordhan's last budget speech, there was a lot of speculation that he would have to raise taxes to cover the deficit that we had. He ended up not raising actual income taxes by much, but what he did do is introduce a sugar tax, which didn't go a long way and won't necessarily go a long way to covering our deficit. So how is that deficit then going to be covered? It's going to be covered through loans. Our debt to GDP ratio is sitting around 58%, I think, closer to 60% at the moment, and we spent 11% of our GDP annually on servicing just debt. 10% of our GDP that could otherwise have gone towards productive things like investing money in industrialization, investing money into technology investments, so that we can also be part of the tech crunch that's happening right now. Unfortunately, however, Malusi Gigaba came in and continued exactly that same lending behavior that Pravin Gordhan exposed us to, a lending behavior where the budget continuously gets serviced by loans and not by the rich of this country. It is my belief that at least that the wealthiest earners in this country should be taxed significantly more. The fear has always then been that there will be a capital flight because these people will take their money offshore. I don't think that's necessarily true, and it's largely still speculative as to whether that's really going to be the case. However, the biggest burden in terms of our tax bracket, at least our tax base, is that it comes heavily off of the so-called middle class. The so-called middle class who finances their entire lives through debt. And those people can't continue to service our tax base. So there needs to be more creative ways in terms of revenue coming into the country. And Tsepo's entirely correct. There's a lot of money available that the state is not digging into. But I believe that a lot of any other solution other than one, state ownership of key industries, state ownership of perhaps mines and lands, anything short of that is a massaging of the symptoms of the problem and not solving the problem at its root cause.
I beg your pardon, I do have a frog in my throat, but getting back to the Democratic Alliance, unequivocally, the statement on leave the Reserve Bank alone, don't even think about the Public Investment Corporation, not even to mention that they say hands off Treasury especially. And this is the issue that we've always had, that Treasury in itself, being the custodian of the purse strings, needs to reflect the demographics, number one. Secondly, on the imperatives of what this country needs. Deal with inequality, poverty, unemployment, and that hasn't been the case. The Reserve Bank, let's just start there, Adil. Why then would the Democratic Alliance pick these particular three institutions?
Look, the Democratic Alliance as a party is just a version of the old apartheid regime structures that actually are only in power right now, where they are hustling power away from the ANC in order to re-entrench the old apartheid methods of actually keeping the majority of this country in poverty. Why are they saying that Treasury must not actually be used in order to change the lives and the conditions and the material living conditions of our people? Is because they know that the minute Treasury starts making decisive decisions and brings about this element of what we call radical economic growth, it's going to bolster a lot of ANC particularly growth, as well as particular results in terms of delivery of services and giving to the promise that they actually gave in the manifesto since 1994. They are not interested in that. They are pushing for the policy called inclusive growth, and IMF-based, Bretton Woods, as well as the Washington Consensus-based policies that says that third world countries like South Africa and developing countries like South Africa should continue the trajectory of being in a developmental mode and status. That is why our ports today are only ports that where we only take our raw materials to and then we export them off, and when we receive finished goods on our ports. Our ports are not geared for finished goods, whereby we actually trade with other countries based on what we produce in our country. So that is the kind of trajectory that the likes of DA are interested in. So Treasury is the gateway to ensuring that fiscal policy is controlled. Secondly, they're saying hands off PIC. Who is PIC, by the way? This is the same government contribution towards the employers with regards to their pension. So when you tell us that hands off PIC, it means that you're telling the state that do not actually decide on the monies that you contribute as a state towards your own pension fund for the welfare of your own employees, which means there must not be any growth. All the monies that is invested and actually put into PIC, by the way, has been one of the most growth-based funds in Africa particularly. We have a 1.8 trillion sitting in PIC. How did that 1.8 trillion come about? It's because of the investments that were made and the monies that were used in order to bolster PIC. Then comes in the state-owned entities. With the state-owned entities, the plan and the plot is they want to strip the state of its capacity. From a DA's point of view and perspective is privatize all of these entities, make sure that you sell off SAA, break down Eskom and make sure that you sell the distribution of Eskom, the power generation of Eskom, as well as the third element, which is now the management and what you call electricity production. So all of these aspects of it, it's what the DA would like to see us, so that we are continued to be brought into this colonial state-based state as a country and sovereignty as South Africa. So we are not going to grow. And if we follow such policies, we are in a deep, deep kind of depression going into the future.
What political elbow room does Malusi Gigaba have in changing policy, notwithstanding that he may face litigation, as we've seen with Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane in her recommendations around the Reserve Bank's mandate being expanded? So how much room does he have?
He's got every room, as long as he's not timid and he is very decisive, and he needs to ensure that. I mean, right now, the current macroeconomic policy of South Africa, which is based on neoliberalism, meaning private sector with very minimal rules, and private sector hopefully will at night pray and have a conscience to act in the best interest of all, and they have not done that. So we know that as a matter of fact. But the macroeconomic policy we have as a country today is actually performing in the manner that it was designed. And what is it designed to do? To create high unemployment, create inequality, and to create poverty. That is neoliberalist macroeconomic policy is designed that way, and it has never been able to create jobs anywhere else in the world. And I challenge people to come and give empirical evidence on how is this appropriate macroeconomic policy for South Africa, because it is not. However, what Minister Malusi Gigaba needs to do, he needs to act boldly. First and foremost, I had hoped that by this Wednesday, he would have and be announcing the refinancing of our 2.2 trillion rand debt to at least cut down our 200 billion rand interest payment to at least below 100 billion. That will release the much needed and then make up for the shortfall that we now have from SARS not being able to collect more because the economy is in decline. I think IMF has just come up with the World Bank that we will grow by between 0.5% to 0.6%. That clearly tells you that the budget that we have, what we have budgeted to receive in taxes, we're not going to be able to achieve that because the economy is growing at not even at a pedestrian pace, but at a snail's pace. Therefore, we are in trouble. The 2.2 trillion rand debt, unless you refinance it, it is not possible. Deficit financing was proved to be an erroneous policy in 1973 already. Why in South Africa today we still practicing deficit financing with a high trade deficit that we have, meaning we are importing more finished goods than we are exporting. We are not able to integrate our economy and trade with those countries we have relationships with. Earlier today, I was at the South Africa-Iran Business Forum where I gave a talk there. But I was astounded that that country has got 70,000 megawatts of nuclear power. The population site is 80 million people or so. They are this year projected to grow at 8%, and yet they have been subjected to the most draconian sanctions in the history of mankind, and yet they continue to grow, they continue to be resilient because they looked inward. And the same thing has happened with Russia. When they were hit with sanctions, we saw domestic productive sectors of the economy, manufacturing, growing and able to then to substitute the level of imports which they were reliant on. Why as a country we are not moving that direction is beyond me. Why we believe we can live on debt, this is beyond, we are the worst alcoholic that has ever lived in history.
It's designed within the system to keep us in debt so we can move forward.
No, but I mean, there's also the scarecrows that are used, you know, in terms of the nuclear power effectively going to impoverish intergenerations to come, and the fact that it is only a mechanism to loot, it's around further capturing the state, and it is a fiscal risk.
Cindy, you're spending 1 trillion, rands to build one of the most incredible nuclear energy production plant in the world, right? For that 1 trillion. Take that same amount, like we did the flop
and
and
this
the
is over
mess
a
up.
period of time.
Over a period of time. We did a mess up with the Gautrain particularly. Gautrain was projected at some point, I believe, when it started off at 7.2. It ended up at what?
27.
Over 27 billion. So some of these things that we keep on really narrating on a daily basis with such level of ignorance is things that we must stop. Infrastructure investment, you know today if you buy a house today, you're guaranteed your appreciation of value based on the asset that you've invested in today at the price of today. So we are buying this nuclear plant capacity at 1 trillion rands in South African terms today. Give the same amount in the next 5 years. You would not be able to afford it as a country. So some of these debates must actually now start being really factual and be based on fundamentals. That's the one aspect of it. So the nuclear issue is really not a big issue right now. People are making it into a scarecrow because France lost a deal on nuclear. US lost the deal in South Africa on nuclear. The British lost the deal in South Africa on nuclear. So that is why it's a big issue. If we had given them the deals, they would not be currently complaining about the building of a nuclear power plant. We still had an investment that was done in the time of President Thabo Mbeki, which was in the People Modular Nuclear Plant. And that production didn't even happen, yet they invested so much of money into it. Why is nobody going back to that and saying, but by the way, not even 10 years ago, we had a similar project running around with regards to the PBM, and nobody ever questioned it. So that's the one aspect of it. Investment in nuclear is one of the best investments we can do. We already have the coastal line by which we can ensure safety and we can ensure that our production of energy is secured and is secured for a lifetime.
I think the real controversy with regards to nuclear energy is not that we're going for nuclear energy, but who is the proposed partner for this nuclear deal. And the controversy is that it's Russia that is the proposed partner for this nuclear deal. I support that controversy in the sense that I believe we need nuclear because we need energy stabilization. Only through energy stabilization can our economy grow. However, it makes no sense to me why South Africa, one of the highest producers of uranium, has to outsource and we have the technology, but it has to outsource the servicing and the construction of this thing when that could be done much cheaper in South Africa itself. So a lot of controversy sits around that, and I think we need to clear that up because it could be cheaper if we did it ourselves. That's the first to say. So there's nuances into nuclear that we think that we definitely need to unpack and not take it at face value.
As an energy expert,
uranium is just a very small component of a nuclear power system because that's just a fuel. It's really very, very insignificant in the greater scheme of things. The reality as we sit here is that we do not have capacity. Even Koeberg, which, by the way, will run for the next 36 years and giving us the cheapest power in history, is that it wasn't built or designed by us, and we haven't in recent years been able to develop that technical engineering capacity. What we do need, of course, there will be foreign players, but you gotta open up the process and there be a bidding process. And if Westinghouse can do it, by all means. But from what I have seen, Westinghouse would not be able to come in competitively. And maybe that is the chief source of our problems as far as nuclear is concerned. We'll probably see a joint venture between two countries, and I would think it's either if it's the Japanese and the US or Russians with the French, that there will be a joint venture. But you need that because energy is everything. You can't grow an economy without a reliable energy supply.
All right, so we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Oliver Dixon, the social political analyst. I'm sorry you had to join us a little bit late. Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, and Adil Nchabeling is president of Transform RSA. As always, much appreciated.